Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name's Nancy Jo Hancock.
Taking the stand, the woman who went on a date with Charles Vallow hours before he was killed.
Did he get very detailed about his life with you?
Yes.
Nancy Jo Hancock testified she met Charles on a dating website for Latter-day Saints. The two exchanged several calls and texts for about a week. Charles said he was getting divorced and had changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy.
He was strangely calm and still kind towards Lori, even through what they were going through.
But things got testy when Lori, who was representing herself, questioned Nancy Jo, the two women meeting here for the first time.
So you spent your whole date getting to know each other, talking about me.
Don't flatter yourself. No, we did not spend the whole time talking about you.
You knew a lot about me, right?
Then there was the awkward exchange about dating a married man that prompted the prosecutor to object on harassment.
Charles was in the process of a divorce.
He was not in the process of a divorce. Did it surprise you to find that out? Do you go on dates with married men? Naturally?
Nancy Jo also said Charles told her about Lori's affair with Chad Daybell.
We were talking about what he was going through in the process of separating from you.
Nancy Jo said she didn't hear from Charles after that first date. Months later, she found out why when she saw his picture on the news.
I was watching TV in December, I believe, and his picture came on the screen, and it said that he was dead.
All right, everybody, welcome into the KSL Stream Center. I'm Shara Park. We have a very special episode here on April 18th in the KSL Stream Center as we dive into the Lori Vallow Daybell trial happening in Arizona. Vallow is charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the deceased case of her late husband, Charles Vallow, involving, of course, her late brother, Alex Cox, as well. 19 witnesses have taken the stand over the past 7 days in a trial that has been combative at times. Some might say just downright bizarre, as Vallow has represented herself in this case. I have got two guests with me today to bring us up to speed on where we stand in this trial, to give insight into where this case stands, where we may be going as we enter into this case on Monday, as this thing continues to develop. I've got KSL journalist Garna Mejia, who has covered this case for years, who has covered Vallow for years, from state to state, has been in the courtroom, has been with the victims' families, up to speed on what has been happening in Arizona. Garna, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it. We also have with us today Rachel Smith, who has been on the prosecuting team for Vallow's first trial in Idaho when Lori was convicted of killing her two children, Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow, and conspiring to commit murder in the death of Tammy Daybell, the wife of Chad Daybell. And I appreciate Rachel Smith joining us today as well. Rachel, thank you very much for taking this time to be with us. First of all, I'm going to start with you, Rachel. I want your take on watching this from a different side now. You were on the case in Idaho, watching Lori represent herself there in Arizona. What has that been like for you, and what is your opinion in terms of what you're seeing unfold down there in Arizona and how she is doing this?
I've said a couple of times throughout watching all of this that Lori is proving to everybody who she is. She's intelligent, she's smart, she's quick, she is capable of conspiring and planning to kill someone. Lori has been her own worst enemy. Her actions in representing herself has really shown the public at large who Lori is, how she thinks, and the steps she will go to get away with murder and conspiracy.
Is she doing a good job in representing herself? Is she doing the job of an attorney, though?
Lori is not doing a good job. She's not doing a good job for a pro se defendant. Lori is not doing a good job in any way comparable to an experienced or seasoned defense attorney. Lori is treating this like a stage on which she is an actor playing a lawyer, and she's not actually doing a very good job.
Okay. Garna, you have been listening in on this court case as well. Tell me your thoughts here. What we have seen so far in her representation. What has stood out to you as we've gone day by day so far?
Well, I think as Rachel mentioned, and she's the one that said this even when we were watching that Dateline interview. I don't know if you remember, Rachel, but there was this, she had to go in Idaho to get mental treatment to be able to stand trial there. And so the question is she crazy? And I remember you saying she's a narcissist. There's evil here, but there is not insanity here. She knows what she is doing. And you called that calculated, very calculated in her questioning, in her moves. And I think we've seen that throughout this trial. And I think you can see that the way she approaches different witnesses. We started off with that, now infamous exchange with her and Nancy Jo Hancock, who was the woman that went on the date with Charles Vallow the night before he was killed. And she was very aggressive, just really coming hard on her, forcing the prosecution to intervene and object. But then you saw her interactions with Kay Woodcock, right? Very different demeanor. I think she called her Miss Woodcock, very almost timid. I don't know if that's the right description, but she was almost whispering her questions. And really her questions boil down to two things, right? What she's been asking every witness. Were you there? And Kay had that remark, no, because you didn't tell me. And so it was just very different, interesting to watch how she approached each and every witness in this case. And the witnesses that she chose that she did not want to cross-examine, right? And the areas that she didn't want to go to. When she interviewed Detective Nathan Duncan, they had hours of text messages, which we know is just like the tip of the iceberg with the amount of information you have there. But Rachel, I'm sorry, I'll let you kind of.
No, you're absolutely right, and you've watched it start to finish, so you know that Lori in Idaho had attorneys acting for her. It is easy for people in the system to assume that because somebody's espoused beliefs sound crazy, that means that person has crazy tendencies. Crazy does not equal insane. Crazy can just be evil that looks crazy to the rest of us. Everything Lori has done since the day she met Chad Daybell till today has been about Lori, designed to get Lori off the hook and designed to position herself in the best light. Every action she's taken.
Well, we're going to play here Lori's opening statements. We'll get that queued up for us here in just a second. But Rachel, what I'd like you to ask you is, what is Lori's defense, if you can clearly state it for us, in all of this? What is she trying to get the jury to understand? I feel like as we watch her put on this display, we kind of get lost in what her message is. What is it she's trying to put out there for everybody to understand? What is she trying to put on? What is this defense?
She's actually got an intelligent defense. She just can't deliver it. Part one is it wasn't murder. So if it wasn't murder, there's no conspiracy. Part two is even if Alex was wrong, you can't show that I conspired with anyone. And so that's where those attacks on Charles come in. That's where the conversation about him coming at Tylee and her being at risk and Alex being hit, that's where all of those questions are designed to go. So the idea behind it is, one, it wasn't murder. It was self-defense or defense of others. And two, there's no conspiracy.
Okay.
She just didn't be able to execute it.
Yep, it's getting muddy. Okay, let's listen to her opening statement here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I have been charged with a crime, a serious crime. And the only question here is, did I commit this crime? Conspiracy. Conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people to commit a crime. Okay, so you see? Okay. There has to be an agreement. There has to be a plan. The evidence in this case will show that Charles Vallow and I got married in February 2006. It will show that it was my fourth marriage and Charles' third marriage. At that time, we each had 2 children. I had Colby, who was 9, and Tylee, who was 3. Charles had Cole, who was also 9, and Zach, who was 7. The evidence will show that our family moved from Austin, Texas to Chandler, Arizona in 2009. The evidence will show that Charles and I adopted our great-nephew, JJ, who was born in 2012. It will also show that Charles and I were married for over 13 years and were raising 5 children. The evidence will show that I was a licensed cosmetologist and worked as a hairstylist for 20 years while we lived in Austin, Texas. The evidence will show that Charles was a licensed life insurance salesman and worked as an independent contractor, selling life insurance policies and annuities, and owned his own business. The evidence will show that Charles and I purchased life insurance policies early in our marriage, and Charles had them issued to the maximum amount possible to each of us. The evidence will show that Charles was 17 years older than me, and that because of Charles' age and an issue that he had with high blood pressure, the maximum amount of life insurance that could be approved for Charles was $1 million. The maximum amount of life insurance that I could be approved for because of my age and my health was $2 million. The evidence will show that throughout our 13-year marriage, that we always had life insurance policies. When a 10-year policy lapsed, Charles would shop for another company who would approve us for the maximum amount of life insurance. The evidence will show that this was Charles' job. This is what he did. I helped him in this business, and this is what he did. The evidence will show that in 2016, Charles repurchased a new $2 million life insurance policy on me, and he was the sole beneficiary. The evidence will show that Charles and I had a happy marriage for 13 years. The evidence will show you that I am the only person being charged with this crime.
I would object to the relevance of that.
Sustained.
As the state has mentioned, they're alleging that insurance money was my motive. Social Security was my motive. Spouses having insurance policies is not a crime. Collecting Social Security is not a crime. Self-defense is not a crime. A family tragedy is not a crime. It's a tragedy. Thank you.
Well, Rachel, that was kind of the synopsis we thought that we could do there for her opening statements. But what we take away from it, what I thought was interesting, we've talked about how she uses a lot, the evidence will show, the evidence will show. Do you feel that now that we've gotten past opening statements and everyone has presented, she is not going to present a defense? Has the evidence showed what she was arguing?
Yeah, looking at the evidence, it is not shown what she is arguing in the way she is arguing it. She is trying to offer an alternative explanation for the fact that she stood to benefit or thought she benefited from Charles's life insurance, that Alex acted in self-defense or defense of others. She's tried to argue that has been what she has injected in almost every question. The prosecutor's use of the text messages, the prosecutor's use of her attitude and demeanor after Charles's death, the prosecutor's use of evidence for the conduct of the parties after Charles died will clearly show that the facts that she argued don't mean what she's implying.
Well, and she's also not arguing like the zombies and Ned Schneider before we got rid of him, those things. Something else that stood out to me just listening to this one more time is that she talks about how she's the only person that has been charged in this case, right? The jury doesn't know that Alex Cox is dead, correct? They don't know that the children they don't know about all of these other cases associated with this.
Right. She is, that is her testifying, which the prosecutor objected to. The court sustained it, but you can't unring that bell. You're going to see a lot of that in her closing argument. She is going to work in the facts that she, quote unquote facts, as she believes them. So she will work into closing argument that she's the only one being charged, because the jury will wonder, why isn't Alex being charged? He was the trigger puller. So it's not a playing by the rules, but it's playing by Lori's rules.
And I have to ask, Rachel, this is, we talked about this last week. This week, did you see anything where you felt, okay, she did really well with this? Is there anything that she did well in her defense?
There were one or two things where she got some statements about the conduct of the Chandler Police Department. I think the jury's going to wonder. I don't think it's going to cause them trouble, but they're going to wonder about some of the decisions for the detectives, why Alex, Tylee, Lori got rides home from the police department. So some of those facts that she got out through some of the detectives, I do think those were important to get out, and she did get law enforcement to acknowledge those. She could have done better, but she did get some of those factors out, and the jury's going to question that. I don't think enough to look the other way, but she did get it out. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Rachel. I have a question for you. I think about the prosecution in this case and trying to work a case against someone who is not an attorney, right? Going up against someone like Lori Vallow in a courtroom, and how difficult that might be. When you're in a courtroom like someone, or going up against someone like Lori Vallow, I just think how difficult that might be on the other side of this. Can you give any insight into what this might be like for the prosecuting team down there? The challenges they might be facing when trying to put on their side of things in this case?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Cases against individuals where I practice, it's called pro se. I know some places call it pro per. When they represent themselves, are among the most challenging for the opposing counsel of any type of case. In a case where it's a criminal case and you're the prosecutor, you not only have to prove your case and present your case, you also have an ethical and legal obligation to make sure you're protecting the person's rights, that you aren't injecting any issues that could cause a court of appeals to think you unfairly beat up on somebody. The courts of appeals, the appellate courts, the trial courts, they're all human. There's a fundamental sense of fairness that pervades people who are in that practice. And so a prosecutor who takes advantage of somebody's not knowing to object,
right,
the prosecutor who opens the door and goes too far, those cases get scrutinized heavily. And we saw in this case the prosecutor be very conservative, be very careful. There were times it was very clear that if she had asked an open-ended, non-leading question, the witness might have said something that could have been objectionable. And so she led through those situations. That's what prosecutors in that situation will do, is in areas where you're worried that the witness will say something that's objectionable, when there's nobody on the other side who knows how to object, you lead.
Wow.
And the court doesn't stop them. So you saw a very strategic use of leading by the prosecutor in several instances. I know that's not the norm in a criminal trial. It's not atypical in this situation. It's really an effort by the prosecutor to keep it really clean, keep it really focused, and make sure that when people look at this for the first appeal, the second appeal, the third appeal, that it withstands scrutiny.
It's almost like your hands are tied because you're not on an even playing field in this case. I do want to go back. I'd like to play some of Tina K's opening statement just to show you the difference between what that kind of even playing field might look like between a prosecutor and an attorney who is knowledgeable in legal standing, in a sense. So let's play that opening statement from Tina K to show you the difference between somebody who knows how to represent themselves in a legal court of law.
So I'm going to need you to stay close to me the next couple days. Mel, too. She can't go to Utah. They're planking some kind of intervention, but want Mel out of the way, so I'm left alone. I need to come get the stuff at your house tomorrow and secure it. Lots to do. Thanks for standing by me. It's all coming to a head this week. I will be like Nephi, I am told, and so will you. Vallow Daybell, the woman seated over here, wrote this to her brother Alex Cox on July 9th of 2019, 2 days before they killed Charles Vallow. But to understand why this is so meaningful, why this is relevant, you have to understand the context. So let's talk about it. In July of 2019, Vallow Vallow was married to Charles Vallow. Vallow Vallow lived here in Arizona, Chandler. Charles Vallow lived in Texas. In July of 2019, Vallow Daybell was Vallow Vallow, married to Charles Vallow. In July of 2019, Vallow Vallow wanted to be Vallow Daybell, wife of Chad Daybell. And in July of 2019, Vallow Vallow wanted to keep the same lifestyle that she had with Charles. And she could get all of this if Charles was dead. She could marry Chad Daybell and become Vallow Daybell. She would get $1 million life insurance policy from Charles Vallow. She would get Social Security for herself and their son, JJ, as a child of a dead spouse. And all of this would be true if Charles Vallow was dead. So what about Nephi? Well, Vallow Vallow, Chad Daybell, and Alex Cox all believed that those who disagreed with them were dark, possessed by evil spirits, sometimes called Z's or zombies. Sometimes they had names for these evil spirits, like Ned. Lori, Chad, and Alex used religion, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a story of Nephi, a prophet, who was directed by the Holy Spirit to kill Laban, to obtain brass plates and secure the long-term prosperity of Nephi's descendant.
All right. Apologies there. Trina K. I wanted to make sure I said her name right. So, Rachel, I just want to ask you there, not to critique necessarily her opening statement there, but just to ask you your opinion here. How has the prosecution done in terms of being able to counteract what Lori has been doing in the courtroom?
I think the contrast between the clip you showed of Lori's opening statement and Trina's opening statement says it all. You have polished, cohesive, organized narrative that frames the evidence and gives the jury context and a framework in which to view what comes next, as opposed to the scattered sort of rote, almost high school mock trial team approach that Lori had. She's using phrases that you have to use. She's wrong. It interrupts the flow. So Trina highlights the evidence. She puts it into almost like a story narrative, so that the jury can internalize that story, can identify with that narrative, and then they will be using that narrative to frame all of the evidence that comes next.
Okay. You know, one thing I want to touch on before we start to wrap up here is how has the cross-examination gone in terms of what Lori has been doing? We know one of the more combative cross-examinations we saw was with Nancy Jo Hancock. We saw a little bit of there as we began to open up here. That was a really interesting back and forth between the two. It seemed like Lori really just wanted to argue with her a little bit more than anything and almost try to embarrass her. What was your take on that?
It was quintessential Lori. She thought she could attack this woman. She thought she could demean this woman for dating a married man. The hypocrisy of that is stunning. And she thought that she could undermine her credibility with the jury by attacking this lady who just came forward because she felt she should. So her cross really should have been ask one or two questions, get this lady off the stand because she only hurts me. Instead, it was combative, attacking, calculated, and it just reinforced with the jury Lori is completely capable of conspiring to kill someone.
Well, and sorry to step in, you guys, but Rachel, Shara, there was that really interesting exchange where Lori said, tell me everything, basically. What was it? Because Nancy Jo said there was a lot of things that we talked about at dinner, right? And so Lori wanted to know exactly what was said. And so Nancy Jo paused and says, well, do you want a narrative? And that opened, they had to do a sidebar, and the judge says, do you really want to do that? They come back from lunch, and Lori just she gets permission to open up the door. The prosecution says, hey, if you want to open up the door to everything that was said, we're not going to stop you. And then you kind of see that change where she maybe had some counsel or someone tell her, hey, that's probably not in your best interest to do that. Was that your take as well?
Yes, there's two, you're absolutely right, two good takes from that. One, you see the judge dealing with the pro se defendant in a very respectful, clean way. And then two, you see Lori listening to somebody else's advice and changing her tactics. That's thoughtful, that's intelligent, that's calculated.
There was a thoughtful moment here as well coming from Nancy Jo Hancock that really played into Charles' character. And I'd like to play this thought because I think it's important to remember who Charles was in all of this, as the focus is often on Lori and who Lori is and what she has been convicted of and what she is on trial for. But I think sometimes we need to really focus on who Charles was as a man. And I think Nancy Jo did a good job of trying to bring that back into the courtroom. So I'd like to play this clip from her for those who did not see it in court. Let's listen in for a second.
Or was there some other reason he was in Arizona?
Charles was ecstatic to see JJ. He was coming to see JJ. He was so excited to take him to school the next morning. He was also coming to look for a place to live. He had an appointment to meet a realtor friend after he had taken JJ to school. And then he was also supposed to meet with Lori's brother, Adam.
So you and Charles have this evening on the 10th. Were you going to meet again?
Yeah, we were supposed to meet up in the late afternoon after he got through with the things that I just said.
So did you have a set time for the next day?
Mm-mm.
Can you describe Charles? Was he a fit man? What was his size?
Very fit and into physical fitness. And while we were talking, I know that he was swimming. I got to go to the gym. And very, very fit, strong.
When you were talking with Charles on July 10th, that evening, let me ask first, do you recall about what time you ended up meeting him?
It was around 7. I got there first, and but it was right around 7, between 7 and 7:15, I'd say.
And do you recall about how long you guys were together until you finally
Well,
left?
the restaurant closed at 10, and they were closed, and no one else was there. So it was after that we left, and then, like I said, we stood by my truck and talked for another half hour, 45 minutes after that.
Okay. So a later evening.
Yes.
Can you tell us, you said that you understood he was going to go see his son. What was his demeanor about with regards to JJ and seeing his son?
Like a kid on Christmas morning. He was very excited to see JJ.
You had talked about his demeanor when he would talk about his wife. On that evening or ever, did you ever hear him swear or use derogatory names or anything like that towards Lori Vallow?
I was surprised with the details that he was describing to me, how kindly he still spoke about Lori, and his hope was that she would be a great mom for JJ.
Did that stand out to you?
A lot.
Why?
Most men that you date are not nearly so kind about their ex and describe them in more derogatory ways and don't speak so kindly. And I remember just thinking how odd in a good way it was that he was not speaking in a derogatory way about Lori.
So that made an impression.
Rachel, I thought that was super powerful. I thought that actually maybe hurt Lori more than anything, that painted Charles in such a good light, that this was a man. And it reminded the jury that this was a man who loved his children, and this was a man who was still caring about his wife at that time. What were your thoughts on that?
I agree. And your point earlier that oftentimes in these situations, it is the people who are lost, the victims, who they get lost in the system. And so that was a powerful exchange, and it was very important for the prosecutor to let the jury know who was taken. Also to establish that this wasn't a person who was going to act in rage. In fact, didn't express the anger and rage that many people going through a divorce or planning a divorce does. So that was very powerful.
Let me ask you this. Who would you say would, in your mind, up to this point, was the most significant or most impactful witness in this case?
That's hard for me to just give one. If I could break it into two, there's the emotional piece. There's the piece that people connect with. And so absolutely Nancy, Joe, and Kay Woodcock. I think the contrast between Lori was very deferential to Kay, because next to JJ, Tylee, Tammy, Charles, Brandon, Kay has lost almost the most. She and Colby, right? So that treatment of her was calculated on Lori's part, but not missed by the jury. So the emotional connection, the human connection, is extremely important for a jury to feel, because they'll internalize that and that narrative based on who was taken. And then the second piece was the logical piece, the evidence, rational, and that would be the testimony of Nate Duncan.
Okay. All right, Rachel, if you, from someone who has been through such a significant and impactful trial with such national attention there in Idaho, can you give us insight into what happens next, in your opinion, down there in Arizona?
There will be the closing arguments. There will be a verdict. I will be very, very surprised if it's anything other than guilty. The state put the evidence in it need to put in. It should be a guilty. And after that, then Lori will face trial for Brandon. That trial will go forward. I don't see Lori admitting what she did at any point. She's not done anything to date to do that. And then after that, she will file an appeal if she's allowed to do so and get back to Idaho. Lori's goal is to get back to Idaho. It is possible she would waive appeals to speed up getting back to Idaho. So the next process will be the appellate process, and it's just be a question of, does she do the appeals while she's in Arizona, or does she get back to Idaho?
Okay. I kind of have a question about that. And Rachel, I'm kind of taking advantage of you. I remember when we talked about last week about whether or not Lori would take the stand, and you said, you know what, you can come back. I would be shocked. I'm not seeing it happen. And everything is indicating that it is not going to happen, that they'll go straight to closing arguments on Monday. But Lori has repeatedly throughout this trial expressed how much she dislikes being at the jail in Maricopa County. She wants to get back to Idaho. Is there a world where, if she is convicted, if that guilty verdict comes down, that Arizona could say, hey, we want to borrow you and have you serve out your time, a few years here in Arizona, and then we'll send you back to Idaho? Would that even be something that could happen?
In theory, that is possible. I would need to look at the extradition orders, and I have not done that for Lori. When she was extradited from Idaho, there will be terms and conditions that the court put on that extradition. I suspect She and her attorneys had some things put in there so that she serves her time in Idaho. She wants to be in Idaho because that's where Chad is. So we would need to look at that extradition order, but if Lori can get herself back to Idaho, that's what she's going to do.
Okay. All right, ladies. Rachel, thank you so much. You have been so generous with your time. For those who have been joining in, leaving your comments, we've been reading them. I appreciate it as well. Rachel Smith, who is on the prosecuting team for Vallow's first trial in Idaho, so generous with your time. Thank you for joining us here in the KSL Stream Center. We greatly appreciate it. Of course, Garna Mejia, who is one of our fabulous journalists here in the KSL newsroom, who has been following this case for years, who has been traveling state to state and will be in Arizona on Monday, continuing to cover this case. We will check in with her on Monday as well. But from everyone here at the KSL Stream Center, thank you so much for joining us. We will continue to update you on this, and you can find updates on ksltv.com. But thank you, ladies. Appreciate you and your insight. It has been very, very helpful in this case, and we appreciate all of your time. So we will continue to update everyone on ksltv.com. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
for the opportunity.